Today we talked with Monika. Let's get a quick intro.
So my name is Monika Venčkauskaitė. I'm actually a machine learning engineer, and I'm passionate about using AI for good, meaning both sustainability and also security of the world. So hopefully today we'll be talking also how AI can be used to make world a safer place.
So welcome back to another episode of Are You a Robot? I'm Dimitrios Brinkman, the host for today's session. And in case you're new here, this is a podcast, videocast, where we aim to tackle some of the greatest challenges that stem from machine learning, AI, and related technologies. The way that we go about this is by gathering the best and brightest in their selective fields and having them come on to the show and talk with us about what exactly they are seeing in their world, how they view the current state of affairs, and if there's anything that we need to be especially aware of. I will mention that the conversation does not stop here. In case you would like to join us in talking about all of the cool stuff that we discuss on this podcast, I encourage you to jump into our Slack community where we are sharing links, talking about all of these different hot topics and whatever else we are passionate about. So the link to the Slack is in the description. You can click on that and come introduce yourself. Let us know what you're working on and what you enjoy thinking about when it comes to AI and ethics, data governance, all these cool new buzzwords that people like to throw around. Are you into bias? Do you want more transparency? You want some explainability? We've got a little bit of all of it in that Slack community. Jump on, join the conversation. And last but not least, I will mention our sponsor, EthicsGrade. They've been with us from the beginning, and I cannot give them enough praise and thanks. In case you do not know what EthicsGrade is doing, or you've never heard of them before, they're an ESG ratings company. ESG ratings means that they measure the non-financial impact of a company on the greater ecosystem. So, what is EthicsGrade doing? Well, they're creating scorecards that measure the different programs companies have, such as their AI ethics program, their data governance program, and a handful of others, which you can go and download for free at their website, ethicsgrade.io. You can also just click the link below in the description and go and be magically transported to their website, download a scorecard, and see what companies like Alibaba or Amazon do when it comes to data governance. How is their data governance? Do they do what they say they do, or are they just giving us a whole bunch of marketing crap? That is ethicsgrade.io. Go check it out. And now, without further ado, let's jump into the conversation with Monika.
Are you a robot?
It's great to have you here, Monika. I am very intrigued by what you do, and especially what you do around machine learning and security. And I want to dive into all of that. But maybe before we start, we can get a bit of background on how you ended up where you are right now.
Yeah, actually, I started out in physics. As a kid, I loved coding, but I also loved science, so I was passionate about studying nature. And I went to study physics. This is where I got introduced into machine learning because I did high energy physics data analysis for CERN. So I looked like for Higgs boson, for dark matter, for all the cool things, studied how the universe started. And afterwards, when I graduated, I applied all of that in the industry. I analyzed cybersecurity logs, email logs, detected hackers, and also got to work on a project which is called Open Source Intelligence, which combined various AI algorithms to analyze the data that's available on the internet openly. So it was quite an ambitious project because it combined a few different algorithms looking at the data from both like image perspective, also sentiment analysis, and so on. So we were able to look connections between various groups on the internet and so on. So yeah, this is how I got into machine learning and cybersecurity. I also worked on a project which was aimed to look for various hacker behaviors scenarios inside the security logs of computers as well. So machine learning both helped to get an awareness what's happening on the internet, and as well it can help to detect hackers too.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me. And so the other thing that is really interesting is this project that you were working on. Can you go into that a little bit more before we go into the security and machine learning?
Yeah, actually, open source intelligence tools are not a new thing. They got, however, much smarter recent years when we started using AI. Basically, open source intelligence is using everything you can get on the internet in the open about the people. So, meaning like from social media, also news and forums, and it can help, and it can also be a dangerous technology. So it's very fascinating. Maybe some of you remember Cambridge Analytica scandal, when this data was used not exactly for the good. It was used to to guide election in some way. So yeah, this is the example when this data and AI use is quite dangerous for us, but it can also help. It can also help to detect like various fake news, propaganda action, and like many extremist groups which try to spark conflicts. So this is where it can be used for good. How does this tool work? So basically,
Exactly.
usually it has crawlers going on the internet and picking up all the data. It can be social media profiles which are open, also news, comments, you name it, everything you post in publicly on the internet. And then it analyzes it. So we used actually quite a few object recognition algorithms on images to look for example, military equipment, and also used sentiment analysis to see how positive or negative comments are, basically to detect the variance of the moods. Because it actually, if you have a very huge contrast of moods inside the comments, it might mean that the post is fake news and it's looking to like spark conflict among the audience. And we also
Oh,
used
fascinating.
BERT algorithms to have a bit of meaning from the comments as well, to see what kind of entities are being talked about, discussed about. And actually, we find out that, well, those tools can actually draw quite a good picture about what somebody is doing on the internet, and who they are, like what school they went to, and so on. So this tool is actually is not like for the use of private companies. Is aimed for governmental use, restricted use, because even though the information is public, from Cambridge Analytica, we learned that you can do so much with it. So, for example, Cambridge Analytica managed to gather data from 230 million people from US, and each of the person left on the internet about 4 to 5,000 data points. So they basically were able to reconstruct their public opinions, political views, and so on. So those tools are better be used for good, and it means to ensuring like the safety, the public safety. And it turns out you can see quite something on the internet. It's from actually military trainings that are happening. Turns out that some people just simply post on Instagram what's happening in their life. So sometimes it's military trainings too. And also like whatever groups are emerging, whatever like events are happening. So it's basically a very good eye overseeing everything what's happening on the public internet.
So I think we talked about before the dangers of this, even in certain governments' hands, and how this could be very powerful. And I'm thinking of like the different, if you had an uprising in a country that has a dictatorship, and how this dictatorship could use this kind of information against their own people. Have you seen that happen? Do you have any thoughts on how that could play out or has played out?
I would not say that it's like actually like used for like for restricting the lives of people, but definitely like public data is being used in some countries. How it would be like in more dictatorship environment, I think, yeah, it would be quite a dangerous asset for government to exploit and use, because you can tell a lot about what person is buying, what they're reading, what are they posting. And yeah, if free speech would be a problem, actually this tool could be used to like enforce something on a person. Not in all the cases you can trace, like for example, Documenta. If you have your online username somewhere, maybe you can not always trace. But actually, in a case of like some offense or some crime, any government could trace it, like from the IP, ask the news site or the social media site to like provide more data, who was behind that IP, and where it's coming from. Also through network providers, they can trace it. So yeah, it's actually a tool with quite immense power. So it would be better used in good hands and with some caution and some regulations.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's fascinating to me all of these different areas or ways that you're talking about machine learning is being used, such as the image recognition or the sentiment analysis. And so, going along the good route on how it's being used for good, you're able to check and make sure that, or certain things trigger the fake news detectors, like if there is a lot of polarization in the comments. Are there other things that would trigger or make these different models know if something is potentially fake news?
I would say some of the things would be to look for emerging trends, because fake news are also targeted to be like something that spreads virally. So when you combine both of those, like something emerging very like rapidly, also with a very polarized views on it,
Yeah.
yeah, you can already like judge it. Okay, of course you always need a human analyst to take a look at it, but you can judge that, okay, this is like a fake news trend that is appearing. And yeah, so these are, I think, the most important ones. And then again, you can like use AI to try to see whether like the pictures or videos are real. It's a bit more complicated, because both the like fake video and fake picture generators are getting better, and also the detectors need to get better. So this is other case of that.
Uh-huh. So let's jump into security now. Since we talked about that, I really wanted to get that out of the way because I find that fascinating. And I know the last time we spoke, we talked about that just briefly. And it felt to me like, wow, this is a huge topic that I know very little about. And I love learning about it from you and also thinking of the implications of the immense power that you can have with a tool like that. But going into security now, maybe you can give us a bit of background on what is happening with machine learning and AI in cybersecurity.
Yeah, so actually, cybersecurity is experiencing a global shortage of talent. So, yeah, it's one reason to get into it, but also the people who are currently working here, we need to solve it. So, one of the ways is to automate as much as we can with AI. And the recent trend is also using machine learning to detect intruders, hackers. So basically, AI is used for number one, I would say, anomaly detection. It's a more simple version where it simply taps into like your network. It observes it for a while and then tries to see whether it's behaving normally or there is some anomaly. For example, like suddenly increased traffic could be a DDoS attack and so on. So or like suddenly like a new device appeared and it could be like somebody trying to like spy your network. So one of those is anomaly detection. Another one is basically trying to put the expert intelligence on how the hacker attacks look like inside the cybersecurity talks and trying to train the models to detect those. It's, I would say, a very difficult task because you need to combine both machine learning intelligence and the expertise of cybersecurity professionals. And it also revolves about like certain systems. So, but on the other hand, the amount of knowledge you can put into an AI or algorithm is like immense. It could be way more than like a team of cybersecurity experts combined. So I think AI is gonna bring good things for security in near future.
Yeah, it's incredible to hear about the different ways that we can use it. And then I guess the other side is, what's the flip side where AI and machine learning is being used for malicious purposes?
Okay, so as well, machine learning can like learn your what's happening on your network. You can also use it to learn and how to exploit some networks to be unnoticed. So I think it's quite powerful tool, but more than that, I think you can here induce that machine learning itself can be fooled. So, for example, if you have self-driving cars, you can fool them with slightly modified traffic signs, or you can fool a face detection algorithm with a picture, and so on. So, I think here we have like a bigger problem. So, there is also an area as an AI security, which is quite new, I would say. People are still trying to figure out like how a like deep learning can be hacked and how to prevent that and what we need to test before deploying such a technology so we could be sure that it works as it needs to work. So it's very I would say unpredictable area because the algorithms themselves are evolving quite fast as well as their use cases. So it's hard to know what's going to happen, but yeah, people are creative, people are trying to get around it, and sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's dangerous, so we always need to be like prepared as best as we can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like a totally new angle. And as we know, AI augments human abilities. And so this is able to augment the human abilities for the good and for the bad. And if I'm not mistaken, the way that right now the AI and machine learning is being put into practice for the defense in your cybersecurity is through like the third party apps, right? And so you would contract a third party app, and then that third party app has some kind of cybersecurity or AI built into their cybersecurity.
Yeah, it's usually a third party app. Also, businesses invest, I would say, way more into their protecting their infrastructure because it's critical infrastructure usually. Also governments. We need to protect actually such critical infrastructure as power plants, because it's actually very attractive target for hackers. Also nuclear weapons. So yeah, governments are investing in that too. So most of the projects are suited for a specific use case because the needs are actually different. It depends what kind of system you have. Is it just like regular computer network, like for example, with Windows-based computers, also with Unix machines, or is it like some industrial computer like a power plant? Then the situation is different. You have different data. You have different pathways for data, also different needs. So there is quite some room for different products. Some are aimed at or businesses, some are aimed at, for example, protecting power plants, and so on. So also edge devices, they have very different security needs, I would say, as well. So basically any type of different device could use a specific solution tailored for it. So for example, if you have cars as well, the way they are being hacked is different too. You would need to take that into account. So I would say the future is bright for this area. Like many products will sprout. So let's wait and see.
Well, yeah, I remember hearing all about different smart refrigerators getting hacked and then ordering a lot of milk from the supermarket or something. And that, I guess, is a very tame way that something could get hacked, and it's like a very minimal effect from it. But then, like you talk about, these autonomous cars that can get hacked are a much different scenario, and it is much scarier, much more high risk. Or then you talk about, on the other side, the energy power plants, and I'm sure that everyone in the US knows all about how there was the ransomware attack on pipelines, I think recently, a few months ago at the time of recording this. And so I guess the next question that I have is, are there any sectors or industries that are using this kind of technology for other purposes?
You mean the cybersecurity one, or?
Yeah, so exactly, the cybersecurity stuff, like, are there places that are using different the cybersecurity in different ways than we would expect?
I would say it would be needed, like, to use it in many industries which are not traditionally using it. Basically, the goal is always to protect the data, to protect the systems. So I would say, like, the final goal is always good cybersecurity, but many more industries, I would say, would need to consider to protecting themselves better. As we noticed, traditionally, some of them don't feel the need that they would need such advanced tools, but it turns out that you always need to be prepared. So, for example, in medicine, last year we have a first victim from cybersecurity incident. Basically, one person's medical records were encrypted by hackers, and they were not able to get help, and unfortunately they died. So hospitals should take more caution, and also I would say logistics, because we realized last year also, when the first vaccines were shipped, basically logistic companies became a very attractive target for hackers. And it turns out they now had a problem like that. They weren't used to be such a good target, so we were not ready. And also many, like, supply chains were hacked, information like was damaged, missing, and so on. So I think well, the final goal would be always the same, cybersecurity, but we should be more aware of it because the incidents are rising actually worldwide, and we should be more aware of it. And basically, like industries which traditionally were not such IT heavy, now they're becoming like using more of such tools, for example, planning routes and so on. They should be aware that as soon as you start using computer, you also need to start worrying about your data and about your security.
That's so true. I'm just thinking about all of these different people that talk about digital transformation, but nobody really talks about the cybersecurity that you need on top of that digital transformation.
Yeah, it's not a very sexy topic, I would say, because it's not a new feature. It's not like something like would change the way you work and so on. But I mean, people realize it usually as soon as the first breach happens, or as soon as the customer data leaks and company loses reputation. So I think we should always keep that in mind. And you also, I mean, should notice that, for example, when every time Facebook gets a data leak, they also like stock value plunges, meaning that a company loses reputation. So it's something like companies should aim to keep and not to risk.
Yeah, exactly. We talk about this quite a bit, but just the trust that you lose when something like that happens is immense. And it's very hard to gain that trust back once you've lost it. So there's another thing that I kind of wanted to touch on. And I know you were talking to my colleague Ria about this. It was the way that tax companies in the US are using machine learning and the different cybersecurity and such. Do you want to jump into that?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit, maybe a little bit from personal experience. I have some family there, so they were surprised that they are being searched for by tax companies, but also like a lot of credit companies are using those tools as well to basically see who are you connected to, and to try to determine how well like are you behaving financially as well. There's like a lot of room for discussion here because we cannot ensure this like your public media profile cannot be very objective, and also like the way you try to measure your credibility from what you comment, it's a bit crazy to see how people try to connect those things. So they get some metrics that are evaluated and used by the companies. So for example, like for credit companies, they use it quite freely. You just get some rating, and there is a lot of like room to question, like, should it be more transparent? Should I know how it was calculated? But so far, I think, the transparency is not that big.
So this is going back to what we were talking about in the beginning, right? With the project. And this is like a mini version of that project that you were talking about.
I would say yes, it's a similar tool. The way it's used, it's very non-transparent because you need to make some assumptions, like, how I rate how well you behave by, for example, seeing you post something on Facebook. So very often, like, these tools incorporate your personal data, such as your age, gender, and so on. So I think a good tool would try to eliminate the bias which are based on your gender and age, but but it should be transparent. It should be transparent, and we should be aware how we are measured. So that's also something like European Union regulations are trying to solve, like to help the AI make more transparent and explainable. But so far, those algorithms are being used in some places without much transparency. So yeah, maybe it will
Yeah,
change.
and it feels to me like the way that they're being used, like you said, without the transparency, but then also we are not really sure if they're looking at our social media or anything. Basically, we can assume from what I'm hearing you say is anything that is public about us on the internet is probably being used to assess our credit score, our insurance, our different things that we apply to.
Yeah, basically anything you posted, anything you shared. So, I mean, when you develop a machine learning algorithm, you can go a couple of ways. You can work with certain hypotheses and try to like make it transparent and basically a bit like explainable and a little bit predictable. But you can also just use the data, pipe it into machine learning algorithm, and work and let it like judge. But we've seen that this approach almost always introduces like a hell of a lot of biases. So, for example, the hiring algorithms, maybe some of you read it, like when you train the machine learning algorithm without like adjusting that, or all kinds of people would be included inside the data set in more or less equal amounts. Without doing that, you get a biased algorithm which says, okay, so in my data set, for example, only 10% of people were women, so I'll assume I can hire like around 10% of women. So the same with the credit scoring, it can simply become a biased machine which would judge like, okay, I've seen like that people with these political views seemed to be like better at paying back their loans. So I'll just assume that somebody with those views will be a better pay over. So then you at a disadvantage. So
Wow.
so I hope like that companies try to like limit the judgment power of AI until they make it like as objective as possible, as unbiased as possible. So this is the goal, but of course, like things happen. So this is, I think, one thing you have to deal with innovation. You cannot prevent anything until you realize the power of technology.
So it's really interesting to like go down the rabbit hole on this one example that you pointed out about maybe certain people that hold views and comment on social media about these views, whether it's political views or just that they like running or something very benign, and they find a correlation that these type of people tend to pay back their loans much more than anyone else, so we should give them more of we should approve those loans more frequently. Now, like diving into that, really, aside from us as the end user deleting our social media accounts or trying to make everything locked down and very private, is it our responsibility to not put anything out there, or is it like you mentioned the responsibility of the company to not use these certain features in the model to judge or make its predictions on? Is it a little bit of both?
I would say, yeah, a little bit of both, maybe a little bit for us, because I mean, internet is all about free speech. and like sharing however you feel and having an opinion. It's simply what humans do. So internet should suit humans, not prevent them from some behavior. But yeah, everything you post online you should be aware of anyway, because if it can be seen, it can be used for some purpose. But I think the company should have a responsibility for what they do. And very often, as I mentioned, political views were taken into account, but we should remember that it might be unintentionally. Maybe company just trained model and they did not know the judgments the model makes. How does it reason? So if they don't have that transparency, they can be using it without knowing it. So usually it's not their intention to judge you by your views or something, but it can happen. And yeah, companies should ensure the objectivity, the data quality. It starts usually from data quality, gathering equal amounts of data about different groups you are trying to predict their credibility. So I think if you put in enough work, enough care to have everybody included, and enough knowledge and expertise to make it transparent and take the biases out of your model, you can have a very good outcome which actually works for everybody. So yeah, I think in the future we'll be going towards more explainable AI. Especially Europe has the edge for that. It also makes it a bit more complicated to get your technology out. It slows things down a bit, but it also ensures that it serves for good. Some other countries are actually taking a different approach. They let the technology be out there until we see serious damage from it, and only then it gets regulated. Well, it makes things faster for business, but it's also a bit more I would say disturbing for society. So yeah, so we see kind of in the world, we see two different trends. One of them is try to prevent it, and another one is try to fix it after something goes wrong. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of those launch and iterate or measure twice, cut once kind of problems, and how the different cultures play into it and what they expect, or the different regulations like you're talking about. And so I'm really thinking about this idea of an insurance company or a loan, a bank, denying someone or approving someone of a loan based on their political ideas. I'm really wondering, well, I mean, I guess first we should just say there's a huge caveat in this, which is trying to make sure that these machine learning models are not biased is a very, very difficult, if not impossible, problem, because we both know how difficult it is to have a 100% non-biased machine learning model, right? It's something that I don't think I've ever heard of existing as of yet. And that is just because of the inherent biases in the people that are programming them and in the data that you're getting. There's so many ways that it can go wrong that it makes it much harder. And so along those lines, just kind of putting a little bit of a hairpin in that and saying having a 100% non-biased model is out of the question. But along those lines, when we are looking at a bank who is deciding on which loan they want to approve, and they recognize there's a certain correlation between whether it's religious beliefs or political beliefs or certain things that someone says on social media or on their blog or wherever, on their YouTube channel, and that their ability to pay back loans or their likeliness to pay back loans. I guess the main question that goes through my mind is, should there be things that are off limits for the machine learning models to take in? like religious beliefs or political beliefs, and then make predictions based on those certain things and finding correlations on them?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's more like of an opinion. I would say there should be, but of course it depends on the culture, what's normal in a certain culture. So, for example, more like in Europe, you would like expect like, okay, we shouldn't take into account that, and that, and possibly if the model is non-transparent, maybe we shouldn't use it at all. So I would say like I would take this with a grain of salt because usually these models have some weight in the decision, but they're not making the entire decision part. What matters the most is always like your credit history, for example, for a bank or for credit company. Also, your habits that they can see within their platform. But yeah, I think there should be limits. There should be limits, basically, like uh, this is actually a very wide area, and Europe is trying also to pass on some regulations that how ethical AI should be. So we are going there, and yeah, it's a lot to consider. All your political beliefs, your gender, even your age. I mean, it would be age discrimination to assume like that you better or worse at some age, because it depends on the person. So I hope we are getting there where we can get a benefit out of this. For example, if we use machine learning on your habits, but we don't take into account your personal data, we take into account your spending habits and so on, we could actually arrive to a benefit where we get a more favorable conditions if we actually have a better money habits. So I think here AI can actually bring good. And there is a trend. There is a trend now for insurance companies also to use like your activity tracker to see if are you taking care of yourself, and if you are working out, if you're looking after yourself. They say you should get a discount for for health insurance. Also, there is a trend for car insurance companies. If there are companies who try to measure how well you drive, and if you are driving well, if you are not speeding, it means you should get better insurance conditions, because you behaving well, you are much less likely to get into traffic accidents. So you should be at the benefit side of that. And some people are actually happily getting good discounts there. So I think AI can bring good to this world, incentivizing good behavior, because how it was done like the day before, you were always judged by your age, by your gender, by like I know marital status as well. So back in the day, I think it was much worse than it is right now. And if we are ensuring it uses the information in the right way, we're going towards a good direction.
Yeah, that's one that I often think about, is how the fitness trackers or the car insurance problem or question comes into account. And I think that's a fascinating one. Obviously, if we are voluntarily signing up for it, right, to allow the insurance companies to see our data on how we drive, if it's just that they're going to take our data no matter what, and that is how it works, that's the de facto standard, I think I'm really against that. But if it's like, hey, do you want to get better rates if you can sign up for this program, then, and you drive well, like you said, you drive the speed limit or under it, then we're going to give you better rates. It incentivizes it, or it incentivizes it. Like if I'm athletic already, and then I find out that, hey, just by sharing my data, I can get better insurance quotas, then maybe I'll go for that. But if it's something where I share it just because I sign up for this insurance company, then that's a whole nother story. So let's move on to something else that you had talked about with me, I think the last time that we spoke, which was about AI being used in China and the monitoring that's happening there. Do you want to talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, we touched it a little bit. It's actually very interesting to see how different it is from culture point of view and how differently it affects the development of AI in different like countries. For example, here in Europe, we have it a bit slower because we try like to mirror first. We have quite a few regulations we need to pass before being able to ship something like a computer vision product to market. And in China, it's way easier. So one of the things is like they let the company ship it. So it's easier for businesses, and they also like put regulations only if they see that it becomes harmful. So I think they are more open for new technologies, which accelerates the growth of AI sector. And one more thing that you have in China is basically government, universities, and companies are connecting together in order to develop AI to get the talent from universities to companies and also to use the data. So there is a lot of focus, and I think many things are like being carried out very well because the growth of AI is immense, and there is a goal like that by 2030 it should like the value from AI should make up about 26% of GDP. So they're aiming high, and it's good to see how much effort like there is. The way it's in Europe, we usually try to prevent the things before they happen, and we are more cautious about our like freedoms regarding our personal data. Like talking about the social credit system, for example, in China, people are actually quite supportive of it because there is a more like widespread opinion. People like believe there should be some governance of that. So yeah, they looking at it quite openly. While here in Europe, it wouldn't work. We would get a lot of like negative negative feelings about that. So yeah, it's interesting. So in China, you actually monitored on your behavior, how well you drive, how well you are crossing streets, and you can get like social score for it, meaning government can have some like negative incentives for you. So if you are not behaving well, you could get travel restrictions and so on. So it's working in China. It's working for the culture. Here in Europe, we cannot track personalized data from like computer vision unless it's some service you subscribe for. But it means you cannot basically use it in streets. It's unless it's anonymous. So if it's anonymous, then yeah, you're able to do it. And another thing about sharing data, actually, people in China are much more willing to share their personal data because there is this support for the growth of technology and so on. So they are willing to share it. And I have one friend, Aileen, so she helped me showing their most popular, I think, app, WeChat, which has like 1.2 billion users. So it's an immense app, I would say, because you do so many things through it. You do payments, you do social media, chatting, e-commerce, like everything. And all of this data basically comes through one company. So they have immense power to know all the spending habits and social habits of like 1.2 billion people. So it's huge power, I would say. It's huge power. And like the things they're going to do with it, well, it depends on them. So they are much more willing to share their data, and they're also accelerating the development of AI. So yeah, this is one approach that helps technology, but people, of course, need to be fine with it. In Europe, as I mentioned, it's a bit different, but well, we're making things happening as well. So I think like we have also like an edge on using AI in medicine. Actually, AI helped to develop many vaccines too. It helps to study protein structures and so on. So like for the recent developments of the world and medicine, Western countries contributed much as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm sure that you've heard of AlphaFold and how that was created and all of that good stuff. And so now going to a little bit more of a sticky question, returning to the cybersecurity part and AI. I mean, you just spoke about how China is investing heavily in AI. And how do you see, or do you have any comments on China's use of AI when it comes to threats with AI on the global scale?
Threats meaning what?
Basically, them weaponizing the use of their AI.
Okay, so there are actually way worse ways to weaponize AI. The way it's like done to monitor people, I think, well, as long as the like government is serving its people and as long as they culturally right with it, so it's like it's working for the country. But well, the way it could be weaponized, I would say it's worse, a bit worse if you use it to like for military applications. So the most, actually, I think the most advanced ones are in Singapore, where there's this whole AI-driven system which uses AI to detect targets approaching the city. Also uses AI with recommendation engine, by the way, which recommends the right weapon for the right target. So as you realize that any type of AI which is developed for like even commercial use can be used for warfare, for defense. So yeah, things become tricky here because well, usually many people like to work on a peaceful side of the AI, but turns out that recommendation engine can also be used for warfare. So yeah, these are the applications. And I mean, so far there's always humans involved in the loop, so the final decisions are so far always on humans, but we don't know what's coming in the future. So as far as for weaponizing personal data, well, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't want to be like a bad prophet, but so far it seems that, of course, it could be used for governance, but as weaponizing it, it's like whole other area of technology that is being developed. So.
Yeah, I was thinking more along the lines of how you were talking about so much investment and ease, or how China is making it so easy to put AI into production and really encouraging the different uses of AI, and how that could then, like you said, maybe not along the military lines of recommender systems being used to decide which missile to use. I'm just thinking about the different hacks that are potentially coming out of that, and the way that China, maybe behind closed doors, is using that same kind of AI to do different things to set itself up on the world stage. But again, this is you don't need to comment on this. I know it's not exactly what we were planning on talking about, but your whole way that you were talking about this made me realize just the amount of investment that's going into China and the amount of really support for AI creates inevitably different ways that AI can be used, and then we see different hacks that happen, and we hear about later that, oh well, maybe they came from the actual government of Russia or China or whoever it may be. So that was something that I was thinking about.
Yeah, so I think it depends on the goals. I would not put it like on certain country, but I mean the methods in the world are the same. Like you have fake news generators, also like AI. For example, GPT, it was developed for fun, but it turned out that it can generate fake news. So anybody that could get hands on it and like use it like for some purpose of, for example, affecting public opinion could already use it like to generate some pretty creative articles, which don't always comprehensive, but I mean we are going there, that like any technology which was developed peacefully could also be used for other purposes. And yeah, I mean it's out there also, like fake video generation, fake image generators. These are the ways that AI was affecting public opinion.
Excellent. Well, I have one last question for you, Monika. It's been fascinating talking to you as always. I love the way that you explain things, and you really have taught me a lot about what is going on in the world when it comes to AI and cybersecurity and the different ways that our data is out there and it is being used, and made me want to go and delete all my social media accounts. But the last question for you is, Monika, are you a robot?
No, too bad. Right, nothing surprising.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for coming on here. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, nice to talking to you, Demetrius, and everybody. So have a good evening.